I was 35, the kind of age where your life should feel like it fits. Mine didn't. I'd built a regional freight company from a sketch on a diner napkin and turned it into something real. Warehouses, trucks, payroll. I signed myself. Years before I ever met Lila, I bought a modern glass and concrete house with money no one could claim but me. It was supposed to be our home after the wedding. Lately, it felt like a lobby I financed for someone else. Lila's family loved the word heritage. Her father, Victor Lang, spoke about the city as if it were a bronze plaque with his name on it. He used to develop property when the market was forgiving. Now his firm wheezed along while the family posed beside leased imports, drank at a club that billed quarterly, and treated labels like oxygen. I didn't see the invoices at first. I saw the attitude. It began with jokes about my shop hands and the missing Ivy League crest on my wall. The tone shifted after the honeymoon. I was less a partner and more a subscription renewed, automatically billed in full. Lila's calendar filled with lunches that cost as much as a forklift tire. Boxes arrived, dresses, shoes, anything that looked expensive in photographs. When I asked about budgets, she tilted her head. Hurt. So I don't deserve beautiful things. I tried to meet her halfway and found there was no middle, only a chute leading down. Victor started floating opportunities and family investments, all one-way valves that emptied into his accounts. Lila stopped saying we. She talked about my next car, my designer, my plans. I noticed how Victor looked at my place not like a guest, but like a man measuring where the piano would go. The realization was cold and clean. I wasn't a husband in their story. I was an asset to be reassigned. In my business, when a supplier smiles too much and the numbers don't, I audit first and argue later. So I did what I know. Quietly, I retained a forensic accounting team to pull apart the books behind Victor's company ownership stacks. Liens terms. No Christmas toast can fix. At the same time, I hired a licensed investigator to map Lila's days, not to catch a scandal, but to test a pattern. Was I funding a performance or a partnership? I didn't threaten. I didn't announce. I documented. And as the pages began to fill, the shape of the truth hardened into a plan. Whatever conversation they thought we'd have about our future would arrive soon enough. I intended to be ready. Saturday tasted like metal on my tongue. I woke before the light pulled itself across the glass of the east wall. Let the house hum around me. Refrigerator-conditioned air, the almost silent pump on the koi pond. I brewed coffee and walked the perimeter the way I did when a new warehouse went live, hands behind my back eyes on details. The rug Lila insisted on. The brass sculpture Victor called taste. The view over the terrace where the city sharpened itself into towers. Every object had a receipt with my signature behind it. That was the thing about ownership. You could feel it even when no one believed you deserved it. I set the table like a negotiation, not a family meeting. No pastries, no wine, 3 low glasses of water on coasters. The seating was deliberate. I took the single chair that faced the room. The sofa, generous and too white, was for guests. The folder, thick plain manila corners square, stayed in the study bottom drawer. I didn't want it in the frame yet. You don't lead with the knife. You let people walk into it. At 1:07 p.m., my phone buzzed. Lila, on our way. Dad wants to be efficient. Me, I'll be here. Efficient. He'd used that word when he toured my loading dock talking to my operations manager, like he was auditioning for an article about business geniuses. Victor Lang loved words that sounded like virtue, but meant control, efficient, heritage, standards. They arrived 7 minutes late, synchronized. The door chime went soft, and their reflection, tall, curated, ghosted across the glass before they turned the corner into the living room. Lila wore a pale suit that made her look like a weather presenter. She was already scrolling something on her phone, eyes distant. Victor wore summer navy and a smile soldered to his face, the kind that never moved his eyes. Adrian, he said, as if we'd run into each other at a golf course I didn't belong to. Thank you for having us. Lovely as ever. Water. I gestured to the glasses. Lila sat without answering. Victor did the same, placing a leather folio on the coffee table like a dealer's shoe. He took a breath. It was theatrical, practiced, and folded his hands. I'll keep this brief, he said. We're concerned. We care about our daughter's happiness. And yours, of course. Of course, I said. He tilted his head, adopting the expression of a guidance counselor breaking bad news about a college application. Lila's from a particular background. She has needs expectations grounded not in vanity, but in culture. Upbringing. It's simply the lane she knows. I watched his mouth form lane. He loved that metaphor. People in lanes could be controlled by signage. She's not happy, he continued, a gentle wave of the hand toward Lila, who examined a thumbnail as if it were a contract clause. This arrangement marriage was a mismatch. No fault, just misalignment. You've done well for yourself, Adrian. For a man with he searched for a word and found one he could defend later trajectory. My trajectory, I said, upward apparently. He smiled as if I'd made a joke he could compliment. And yet there's a difference between doing well and fitting in. Lila is used to certain comforts. You've noticed the tension. I didn't reply. He absorbed the silence as an invitation. We've thought carefully about how to proceed without ugliness, Victor said. No public spectacle, no rancor, just efficiency. He lifted the leather folio and removed a document and a pen, placing both with ceremony on the table and turning the page toward me. A quitclaim deed. My address in the caption, the legal description in warehouse prose, blank lines for my signature, and a notary's seal. Behind it, already paperclipped, a mutual release of claims drafted in soft language that meant, don't you dare call a lawyer. The pen had weight, the way jewelry has weight. You'll sign the house to Lila, Victor said softly, as if offering me anesthesia. You'll pack a bag. We'll settle the rest discreetly privately. You're young, you'll thrive. Sometimes the kindest thing is clarity. Lila spoke for the first time, not looking up. It's best for everyone. Everyone I asked. She rested the pen on the deed and finally met my eyes. There was no anger there, no grief. Just certainty. She'd already decorated my home in her mind once. She was redecorating it now without me. Victor leaned forward, palms open. We don't have to make this more difficult than it is. Lawyers complicate. This is clean. Clean, like a polished knife. I see, I said. I kept my voice level, my posture easy. In negotiations, people hear what they expect, startle them, and they show you where they're fragile. Give me one moment. I stood. Victor sat back, a small exhale through the nose. Lila's gaze slid to the windows as if already rehearsing the light in her new life. I walked down the short hall past the kitchen where the espresso machine blinked a small green eye past the art Lila had insisted on, and I had allowed because refusing would have made the evening longer. In the study, I opened the bottom drawer and lifted the folder, feeling its quiet mass in my hands. When I returned, neither of them had moved. The deed waited on the table like a dare. I placed the manila folder beside it and sat. Victor's smile did a small calculation. Your bank statements, he asked, making the word bank sound rural. We're not here to audit you, Adrian. Look first, I said. Before you ask me to sign anything, read the first 3 pages. He hesitated. You could see the part of him that hated to follow instructions from someone not invited to his club. Then he nodded benignly, as if humoring a child with a rock collection, and opened the folder. The silence in the room changed temperature. His eyes moved left to right, back left, quicker now. You can tell when a person stops reading and starts searching. He turned a page, then another. He swallowed the sort of involuntary movement people pretend is nothing. His thumb hesitated on the 3rd tabbed section, and then kept going against his own caution. The smile he wore to every meeting he'd ever controlled fell away as if unpinned. Dad, Lila said, still at the edge of boredom. What is it? Victor didn't answer. His face was losing color the way a tide slips from sand, not all at once, but with a clarity you can't negotiate with. He reached 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose like a man adjusting glasses he wasn't wearing, then let the hand fall and turned another page. What is it? Lila asked again, voice sharp now. The word it traveled around the room and touched everything I owned. Victor finally looked at me. For a second, there was no script, no choreography of concern and superiority. Just a man weighing a new physics. He glanced back down and saw the next document, and the next, and the letterhead of a certain registered agent he did not recognize, because he had never needed to know those names before. He closed the folder a quarter of the way, opened it again as if repetition might change sequence. Adrian, he said, carefully making my name sound like trap. How did you wanted efficiency, I said. I invested in clarity. Lila reached for the folder. Victor's hand covered it before she could touch it. Don't, he said too fast. She froze, confused. Dad, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. We came here for a signature, not. This isn't ridiculous, he said, and the pitch of his voice sank. He lifted the top page slowly as if it might trigger something. This is. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have a word that could play both in his head and out loud. I sat back. People think winning is loud. It isn't. It's a vacuum. It's watching the air between someone's assumptions and reality collapse until the gap makes a sound only they can hear. Victor turned to the third tab again, fingers clumsy now. He read the first paragraph twice. He blinked hard as if trying to return to a previous line of code. He turned one more page and then rested both hands flat on the table, steadying himself. Lila stared at him. "Dad, you're scaring me," she said, which was the closest she had come to honest feeling in months. He looked at her with something that wasn't love and wasn't anger. It was older than both. It was calculation failing. He exhaled like a tire finding a nail at highway speed. "Go upstairs," he said softly, not looking away from the folder. "Pack a bag." She laughed once short. "What?" "Go. Upstairs." He lifted his eyes to mine, not pleading, not enraged. "Just aware. Lila now. Please." "Why would I?" "You said, 'We're here so he signs.'" She gestured at the deed as if the pen should obey her. "Adrian, tell him to stop this." I didn't answer. My silence was the only honest thing in the room. She stood, then sat, then stood again, hands opening and closing at her sides. "Dad." Victor closed the folder gently like a man putting a lid on a hazardous chemical. He spoke without looking at her. "Upstairs. Pack. We're leaving." He had to say it 3 times before she moved. While she was on the stairs, the house changed. It didn't shift on its foundations. It repositioned in my mind. The angles were mine again. The glass stopped being a mirror of their performance and became a window simple as function. Victor's hand stayed on the folder. I could see the pulse in the tendon at his wrist. He was breathing through his nose slow as if that could slow time. "Adrian," he said, and the word wore none of the old lacquer. This isn't necessary." I didn't fill the space with language. He tried again, reaching for a tone he could own. "We can discuss terms. We're reasonable people." He glanced down at the top sheet, winced, and corrected himself. "I'm a reasonable person." "You came here," I said, "to move assets without counsel. You brought a deed to a house you didn't buy and a pen for a signature you didn't earn. You've used reasonable 3 times today. I don't think you know what it means." He absorbed that without blinking. Men like him are built of absorbing. They digest other people's boundaries and convert them into calories. But there are metals the stomach can't process. Upstairs, a closet door slid on its track. Another. A drawer shut too hard. The sounds were domestic, almost tender, like any couple preparing for a weekend. The context reshelved them. It was an exit wound. Victor's gaze drifted to the deed, then back to the folder as if he were choosing a faith. He touched the leather folio with one finger, then removed it from the table and placed it on the cushion beside him, like a superstition he had decided not to believe in after all. "Adrian," he said, and stopped. He was testing how my name felt without the old map. "You've put a lot of effort into this." "You asked for clarity," I said again. The phrase fit the day like a glove. "You misunderstand. I meant clarity for Lila." A pause. The words scratched his throat on the way out. "I didn't think you'd." The sentence died. He didn't think I could. I stood not to loom. He'd read that as triumph, but to let energy move somewhere else in the room. I carried the empty water glasses to the kitchen, rinsed them. When I returned, Lila was at the bottom of the stairs with a wheeled suitcase and a tote that didn't match. She looked around as if staging an argument, finding no set piece willing to play. "This is absurd," she said. "I'm not leaving my house." Victor flinched at but he didn't correct her. He looked smaller under the skylight, as if the light had recalibrated its unit of measurement. He picked up the folder, stood, and handed it to me with both palms under it like an offering. For a second, his fingers didn't let go. "You don't need to do anything rash," he said. "Rash," I repeated, neutral. He made himself meet my eyes. We stood that way long enough for the front door to remember how to be a front door. Up close, you could see the grooming in him, not the haircuts and the suits, but the muscle memory of rooms obeying. He was built to belong in places like this one, and he knew it. He also knew he didn't anymore. Behind him, Lila rolled the suitcase toward the entry wheels, knocking softly over the seam between tile and hardwood. She looked at me once the glance of a person who believes a smaller fire might still be possible if she can just find the right word for oxygen. Adrian, she said. Just my name, as if she could conjure a different man with it. I didn't answer. I moved to the door and held it open. Not gallant. Functional. Victor started past me, stopped and pivoted. The choreography faltered and then found a final position he could survive inside. He turned back to his daughter. His voice shivered and caught itself. "Start packing, Lila," he said. "Now." Lila didn't believe the word now meant now until the zipper on her suitcase snagged on a loose thread, and she had to yank it twice. The sound was too ordinary for what it signaled. Victor stood in the entry, not blocking her, not helping, looking like a man trying to remember which door led out of a burning house. "Keys on the counter," I said. She froze, and for a heartbeat the old choreography tried to resurrect itself. Her little smile, my little concession. When it didn't arrive, she set the key fob beside the water glasses and pulled her tote higher on her shoulder. Victor opened the door. Wind from the terrace shivered the fern Lila had insisted on. They left without closing it behind them. I did that part. The quiet that followed wasn't peace at first. It was vacuum. I stood in it until the air found a way back into the rooms. Then I went to work. I sat at the kitchen island with my phone and a legal pad. One column for personal, one for corporate, one for Victor. I called the credit card company and shut down every supplementary card attached to my accounts. I logged into the joint checking and savings and removed permissions, leaving the balance untouched and documented. I scheduled a locksmith for the morning, not to trap anyone, but because boundaries are physical as well as legal. I emailed my operations manager to say I'd be out on Monday and that the Reno Lane closure could be solved by the Carson yard if we moved the nighttime crew. Then I called my attorney. "File first thing," I said. "The petition we drafted used the version with the attachments." "Adrian," she said, tone neutral. "You're certain? I'm done being a subscription." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. I carried the folder back to the study and spread the sections on the desk, not to gloat, but to remind myself that I hadn't imagined the scale. Section 1 was the autopsy on Victor's firm debt ladders, leaning against debt ladders covenants blown through and taped over with bridge notes. The report's language was cold and undecorated, the way truth is when no one needs it to sell a product. On the last page was the ledger that had unpinned Victor's smile, the list of obligations, and the little line to the right of each assigned to North Star Holdings. It had taken 3 months to build North Star, longer to move through the lenders quietly enough that Victor's ecosystem wouldn't twitch. Commercial paper is personal in this town. You don't just purchase notes, you purchase introductions. I had hired a man whose signature barely exists online and paid him to attend breakfasts I didn't want to eat and shake hands I didn't want to remember. One bank officer said it best under his breath. "We both know who's solvent here." Assignments were stamped. UCC3s were filed. The pile of small temporary fixes Victor had layered over a decade now had a single address where notices would be sent. Section 2 was surveillance without drama. The PI's photos were boring in the way that receipts are boring until you add them. Lila at lunch. Lila at a boutique. Lila at a hotel bar she'd never mentioned, not alone, not drunk, not sinning in a way that could be posted and shamed, but conducting a quiet interview with a man whose last name bought him a certain kind of table. The transcripts weren't romantic. They were project management. If Adrian won't align with the plan, I need a glide path. The PI hadn't editorialized. He didn't need to. The entries added up a personality running the numbers on replacement. Section 3 was the part that made Victor speak in single syllables. Drafts of a complaint for fraudulent inducement and misrepresentation regarding family opportunities I had been offered, with exhibits that tied those opportunities to accounts a reasonable person would call siphons. Letters of rescission prepared to withdraw from informal understandings that were never contracts because men like Victor prefer handshakes. Handshakes leave fewer fingerprints. And the divorce petition, clean, factual premarital property listed by parcel and date attachments that would impress a judge who liked dates and disliked theater. I slept like a man who sets alarms, not because he fears oversleeping, but because he respects the morning. At 9, the locksmith came and changed 3 cylinders each with paperwork suitable for court. At 11, Lila returned with Victor and a mover in a rented box truck. I let them in. Lila tried a speech something about dignity and about how I'd regret this when I calmed down, but stopped when she noticed the document packet on the dining table with my attorney's letterhead. Victor kept his eyes forward and his hands on the furniture. Receipts are under painter's tape, I said. Blue labels mark what stays. They took clothing shoes, the art I always thought looked like a riddle solved incorrectly. I didn't challenge anything she'd personally worn or used. I challenged anything glued to the idea that the house was hers. I removed the spare keys from her trinket dish and put them in an envelope. When the truck door rolled down, the sound had finality. As they pulled away, I called the cleaning crew and said the word deep twice. When they arrived, I worked in the study because I couldn't watch strangers erase the last of a performance I had paid for. By Monday afternoon, stamped copies of the petition lived in a court file and a scanned copy lived in my inbox. My attorney sent a note that we were well positioned, and in the same message CC'd her partner, whose practice is restructuring. Separate matters, she wrote, but related. The partner and I met Tuesday in a glass-walled conference room where the view put the city at a civilized distance. He had a gift for making options sound like chess, not war. You could bankrupt him, he said, and no one would be surprised. But if you think there's value in the underlying business, and your report says there is receivership, is a hammer where a screwdriver would do. Control beats demolition. I don't want Ash, I said. Ash is easy. I want permission. He smiled, not unkindly. Permission to what? To define the terms we all live on. We sent notices of default under the assignments. They were clinical, almost compassionate. We suggested a meeting. We held that meeting in Victor's office where the air smelled like cologne and learning. His framed press clippings on the wall had yellowed just enough to make their clippings obvious. He sat at the head of the conference table, and then, as if remembering the physics of chairs, shifted one seat to the side. I didn't take the head either. The restructuring attorney did. Optics are part of diet, let the facts eat the room. We put the options on the table the way paramedics put instruments on a tray. You can contest, my counsel said. You can threaten, you can stall. We will move anyway. Or, and here he did the small shrug that means he knows the outcome. Before the question, we agree on a path that preserves this entity, saves you personally from the worst outcomes, and gives my client control consistent with the risk he is assuming. Victor didn't ask what control meant. Men like him always know the verbs that matter. We slid the term sheet across. Bridge capital from North Star sufficient to cure defaults and stabilize operations. A 90% voting stake to me via a newly issued class. Me approving any expenditure over $500. Weekly reporting cadence. My CFO seconded as interim controller. A personal guarantee from Victor removed in exchange for deeds of trust on 2 non-core assets, and a consensual sale of the family residence within 90 days. In return, no bankruptcy filing, no complaint filed against him yet, and a pathway to pride that looked like competence rather than memory. He read it. He did the page-back page-forward ritual that had failed him in my living room. He looked at me once, and what lived in his eyes for a second wasn't hate. It was the knowledge of being measured accurately for the first time in a while. I'll lose the house, he said almost to himself. You are going to lose it, my attorney replied, not unkindly. This way, you sell it. He signed with a pen that didn't feel like jewelry. He didn't look up when he finished. He slid the pen toward the edge of the table and then retrieved it, a small human gesture that said he still owned something. We shook hands. It was professional, not ceremonial. When I left, the receptionist's smile had the brittle quality of a person who understood that geometry had changed and was trying to be polite to the new angles. That week, my lawyer's office received an email from a firm with a name designed to sound protective and expensive. They represented Lila. They attached a list of alimony demands that read like a holiday wish for a family with 4 incomes. We sent back a single exhibit redacted pages showing her glide path texts and 2 photos in which she wasn't doing anything illegal, merely reorganizing loyalties in a way that courts translate into words like dissipation and fault depending on the jurisdiction. We invited her counsel to continue the conversation, mindful of how public records are made. They did not continue the conversation. At the first status conference, Lila wore charcoal and righteous fatigue. She looked everywhere but at me. The judge liked calendars and disliked stories. Our exhibits were patient time-stamped, immune to adjectives. My attorney did not perform. She cited. The judge signed. The hearing ended before anyone caught a second wind. Afterward, in the hallway, Lila's lawyer approached mine with the professional smile we all rent. They spoke quietly. When they finished, my counsel handed me a thin envelope. Her team is withdrawing spousal support claims, she said. She'll keep personal items. Nothing else. I nodded. Relief didn't flood me. It properly sized itself. You don't celebrate gravity for behaving like itself. The following Friday, my new controller sent the first weekly report on Victor's company. The numbers didn't lie and didn't flatter. There was muscle under the bloat. We cut vendor duplication, renegotiated a bad lease, turned off 3 subscriptions that were the software equivalent of country club dues. For the first time in months, the cash flow statement didn't look like a heart monitor in a storm. On Sunday, I changed the dining chairs. It seems like a small decision until you live with it. The old ones looked like decisions made to impress guests. The new ones looked like decisions made to sit in. I donated the brass sculpture to a charity auction because it deserved to be wanted by someone who believed in it. A mutual acquaintance called to ask whether I had heard. It turned out the sale of Victor's house had closed faster than anyone expected. They'd taken an offer under ask because the carrying costs were knives, not spoons. Someone had seen Lila downtown working the host stand at a restaurant where she used to order the expensive salad and never finish it. I said nothing. The acquaintance waited for me to say good or serves her right. I didn't. We hung up. Silence is sometimes the only moral inheritance you can claim and pass on. On Monday, I toured a project site Victor's firm had promised for years and never finished. I wore a hard hat and boots because I always have. The foreman didn't know who I was yet. He explained the delays with that fatal mix of honesty and resignation people reserve for structures they love that won't stand. I pointed to 2 bottlenecks that weren't weather or fate. They were decisions. Fix those, I said, and this can breathe. He nodded like a man receiving oxygen. Titles matter less than grammar. I spoke in sentences he understood. When I got home, the house didn't echo. The cleaning crew had erased fingerprints I didn't want and left the good ones the carpenters, the installers. I made a simple dinner. I ate at the island with the folder put away and the counters empty. The phone buzzed with the calendar alert I'd set weeks ago and forgotten dinner with a pair of clients in from out-of-state investors who cared about warehouse throughput and contracts that lived past a storm. We'd booked a table at a place downtown because they liked the wine, and the view of the river made everyone nod at the right time. I almost canceled. Then I didn't. 7:30. I texted my operations manager. I'll take this one. Take a victory lap, he replied. No laps, I wrote back, just miles. I closed the study, turned off the terrace lights, and stood for a moment in the doorway to the living room. The angle, the glass, the city finding its night. The house felt neither big nor small. It felt proportionate, like a suit tailored after someone finally measured the shoulders instead of guessing. The next stretch wasn't a parade. It was work, the kind I know how to do. And somewhere across town, a host stand would light under a pendant lamp and a door would open with a sound that meant someone else's evening was beginning. I tied my shoes and picked up my jacket. There are conversations you can't avoid forever. There are encounters you don't need to stage. Some of them walk to your table at the appointed time, pen poised, smile practiced, waiting to ask what you'll be having and whether you'd like to see the list. I headed out not for a scene but for dinner. The river was black glass, the city buzzed. My name was on the reservation, and for the first time in a long time that felt like the simplest kind of ownership. The river was black glass, and the restaurant windows threw coins of light across it. My clients liked this place because the napkins felt like shirts, and the wine list read like a genealogy. I'd booked under my own name, because that's what you do when you intend to be seen exactly as you are. They were already seated 2 partners who believed in forklifts and contracts, so we started with freight lanes and winter contingencies. Work is a kindness. It gives your mind rails to run on. We were halfway through a conversation about throughput when a shadow paused at the edge of our table. Good evening, she said. Can I start you with Lila? She wore the standard black apron tie smile that was part muscle, part policy. For a beat, neither of us moved. Then training reasserted itself. She lifted her pen. The clients glanced at me the way travelers look at a pilot during turbulence. I gave them the smallest nod. We're fine. I ordered sparkling water. They followed. Lila wrote carefully as if handwriting could stabilize time. When she came back with the bottle, her hands were steady until they weren't. A droplet slipped from the lip and kissed the table. She wiped it precise and left a quarter-inch square of dryness like a badge. Dinner filled itself with the language I prefer: quantities, milestones, penalties that keep friendships honest. Lila stepped in and out of the frame as servers do, replacing plates, refilling glasses. She hovered just outside hearing range, but inside the obligation to check on us. Once she asked whether we'd like dessert, and I said no thank you, as if answering a neighbor. The deal closed with a handshake that felt like both of ours. My clients left to catch a red-eye. I stayed a minute because leaving the second a thing ends makes it look like you were only there for the ending. The check arrived. I signed added 20% and set the pen down. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Generosity is only clean when it isn't a performance. As I stood, Lila was at the host stand under a pendulum of light. She looked over, not to invite, not to accuse, just to register that the geometry of the room had changed and would stay changed. I gave her the same nod I'd give a stranger who'd done her job well. Outside, the river kept pretending to be a mirror. Weeks began to stack in an orderly way. The weekly reports from Victor's company turned into bi-weekly, then monthly. By the second quarter, they were boring in the most satisfying sense: revenue lines that didn't wobble, expenses that made sense, aging that behaved. We cut the ceremonial fat and kept the muscle memory that had built something real before ego put on weight. I installed a management team that spoke spreadsheet and job site with equal fluency, then stepped back. A good owner knows when to remove his shadow. I still visited the office once a quarter. Victor had a room now, not a corner and not a view, a decent rectangle with a door that closed. The first time I saw him there, he stood when I entered, and then remembered he didn't have to. We talked about backlog and permits like it was weather. He didn't look me in the eye. It wasn't defiance. It was arithmetic. Pride is a currency. He'd learned its exchange rate. The sale of his house closed inside the 90 days. The listing photos had been careful afternoon light, fresh flowers angles that hide what a mortgage does to a man's sleep. They accepted under ask because the carrying costs were carnivores. A friend of a friend said they'd moved to a rental with a lawn small enough to mow in one podcast. That's not a demotion if you choose it. This wasn't chosen. Every so often, a mutual acquaintance would ask whether I'd heard about Lila. Apparently, she'd gone from host stand to server, then to double shifts. The story always waited for me to react like a dog waiting for the word treat. I didn't feed it. Silence is a boundary you can carry in your pocket. At home, I kept subtracting. The chandelier that looked like a chandelier of a chandelier went to auction. The chairs we never sat in went to a charity that made good rooms for people who needed them. I kept the things that did a job and did it well. Evenings grew wider. The house stopped insisting on being admired and let itself be lived in. One Sunday, I took a drive with no purpose that could be itemized. The city was in its honest clothes, laundry lines, delivery vans, kids negotiating rights to half a sidewalk. I passed one of our sites and pulled over. Steel in the air looks like a sentence mid-verb. The foreman waved me through the gate without ceremony. He'd learned my name by then, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the timeline posted on the trailer wall, updated, inked, possible. Back in the truck, my phone lit with an email from my attorney. The last administrative loose end in the divorce had tied itself. There were no more hearings, no more stamps. Just a line in a database that meant two people could stop being each other's problem on paper. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt proportional. The paperwork didn't make me free. Behavior had months ago when I chose audits over argument, structure over spectacle. Freedom is rarely a fanfare. It's a checklist you finish and a door you close without slamming. A few days later, I had to swing by Victor's office for a signatures and sign-offs run. The receptionist looked relieved to know exactly what to call me now. Titles are a kindness for people who answer phones. Victor stepped into the hallway and for the first time met my eyes. What stood there wasn't a villain or a victim, just a man wearing the consequences of his preferences. "Things are stable," he said. "They should be," I replied. He nodded. The gesture carried the weight of an apology he couldn't say, and I didn't need. We stood a moment longer than strangers and shorter than friends, then let the hallway belong to other feet. On the 6-month mark, because I like round numbers even when calendars don't, I cooked dinner and ate it at the island with the windows open. The evening traffic on the avenue made its low collective sound. Somewhere, plates clinked in a restaurant where a server asked if anyone wanted dessert. Somewhere else, a small office light clicked off and a man locked his door, went home to a place that was not the place he'd promised himself, and slept because tomorrow had a schedule. I walked the perimeter of the house the way I had on the morning all of this pivoted. Glass concrete light. Not trophies. Tools. I sat in the chair that faces the room and listened to the quiet until it stopped being an achievement and became the baseline. People want revenge to be a scene. They want speeches, spotlights, exits you can applaud. What I got was better. I got order. I got boundaries that hold. I got to choose who eats at my table and which doors open with which keys. They tried to write me out of my own address. What they lost wasn't a house or a job or a surname on a club roster. They lost the illusion that other people's work is just furniture you can move. Call it karma if you need poetry. I don't. In logistics, we have plainer words, inputs, outputs, chain of custody. I know what went in. I can live with what came out. I turned off the lights one by one, not to be dramatic, just because it was time, and went to bed in a room that belonged to me before it had to prove it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.